Western Spring Television. Ours it is.
Good evening and welcome to Spring Global on Western Spring Television. Now the headlines. Ex-Deputy Senate President Ike Ekweremadu, wife convicted of organ trafficking. Equatorial Guinea confirms 8 new cases of Marburg disease. China alleges that U.S. destroyer illegally enters South China Sea. My name is Tunde Ido. We begin with legal matters. A former Deputy Senate President, Ike Ekweremadu, his wife Beatrice, and their doctor have been convicted of organ trafficking in the first verdict of its kind under the Modern Slavery Act. Mr. Ekweremadu, his wife Beatrice, and Dr. Obinna Obeta were found guilty of facilitating the travel of a young man to Britain with a view to exploit him. The jury said Mr. Ekweremadu, his wife, and their doctor criminally conspired to bring the 21-year-old Lagos street trader to London to exploit him for his kidney. The prosecutor, Hugh Davis KC, told the court that the Ekweremadus and Obeta had treated the man and other potential donors as disposable assets. Mr. Davies told the jury that the behavior of Mr. Ekweremadu showed entitlement, dishonesty, and hypocrisy. However, the lawmaker's daughter, Sonia, was cleared by the court. In the meantime, the Court of Appeal in Abuja has fixed Friday to deliver judgment in an appeal by Senator Ademola Adeleke seeking to affirm his election as Osun State Governor. The court had reserved judgment after hearing submissions in the suit on March 13th. In the appeal, Governor Adeleke is the appellant, while Boyega Oyetola and the All Progressive Congress APC are first and second respondents. The Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, and the PDP are also joined as the third and fourth respondent in the suit. In a judgment delivered on January 27th, the Osun Governorship Petition Tribunal sacked Governor Adeleke and affirmed Mr. Oyetola as a duly elected governor of the state. 2 of the 3-member panel held that Mr. Oyetola was able to prove that there was overvoting in some of the polling units. Governor Adeleke had rejected the judgment, describing it as a miscarriage of justice and an unfair interpretation against the will of majority of the voters. And news outside Nigeria, the World Health Organization, WHO, has announced that 8 new confirmed cases of the in Equatorial Guinea. This brings the total of laboratory confirmed cases to 9 and probable cases to 20 since the outbreak of the disease was declared in February. In a statement, the WHO Africa Director, Matshidiso Moeti, said the confirmation of the new cases is a critical signal to scale up response effort to quickly stop the chain of transmission. He noted that of the 8 cases, 2 were reported from the Central African country Kia-Ntem province, 4 from the Littoral province, and 2 from Centri-Sor province. Marburg virus disease, a deadly one similar to Ebola, is a viral hemorrhagic fever that can have a death rate of up to 88%. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has established an interim administration for the country's northern region of Tigray a key step in the implementation of a peace plan to end the war. The interim administration was set up by the upper chamber of the Ethiopia's parliament and appointed Tigray People's Liberation Front delegate Getachew Reda as head of the interim administration. In a statement posted on Mr. Abiy's Facebook, he said it was necessary to establish an inclusive interim administration in ensuring a sustainable peace and stop conflict. The decision was one of the agreed outcomes signed as part of a peace pact signed in South Africa in November of 2022 between the TPLF and the federal government to end the war in Tigray. The move also comes a day after Ethiopia's parliament voted to remove the TPLF from a list of terrorist organizations, a designation dating back to May 2021. And still in Africa, at least 5 African people have died and another 28 are missing after a boat sank off Tunisia as they try to cross the Mediterranean Sea to Italy. According to the economic of ISFAG, has become a major departure point for people fleeing poverty and conflict in Africa and the Middle East for a chance at a better life in Europe. The incident comes amid a campaign by Tunisian authorities of arrest targeting undocumented sub-Saharan African immigration. And in Europe, French workers have blocked access to a terminal at Paris main airport this morning as part of a nationwide protest against President Emmanuel Macron's pension reform plan. There were also protests near Toulouse in the southwest, where plumes of smoke were seen rising from burning piles of debris blocking traffic on a highway. Opinion polls have long shown that a majority of voters were opposed to President Macron's plan to increase the retirement age from 62 to 64. However, workers were further angered by the government's decision last week to push the pensions changes through Parliament without a vote, as well as yesterday defiant comments from President Macron where he announced that the new law will come into force by the end of the year. And to the Russia-Ukraine war, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky has promised to restore everything as he visited the city of Kherson. In a post on Telegram, the Ukrainian leader said during the visit he discussed providing electricity to settlements. He stated that the government is considering the restoration of electricity supply in the deoccupied territories and the repair of equipment destroyed due to Russian shelling. The president further appreciated workers who are working to ensure the full restoration and protection of the energy sector. Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping has invited Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez to Beijing for a state visit as President Xi tries to boost support for China's peace proposal for Ukraine. Spain's Minister for the Presidency, Felix Bolaños, confirmed late yesterday, noting that Prime Minister Sanchez will visit China on March 30 and 31. Mr. Bolaños cited President Xi's possible mediation in the war in Ukraine as a critical reason for the visit. Spain takes over the EU's rotating presidency in July, with Mr. Sanchez portraying Madrid as a staunch NATO ally of Ukraine. Mr. Xi met with Russian President Vladimir Putin this week to promote Beijing's peace plan for Ukraine, which Mr. Putin said could be a basis for ending the conflict. In the meantime, South Africa's Foreign Minister Naledi Pandor has said the government will discuss the arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court (ICC) against Russian President Vladimir Putin before considering any action. Mr. Putin is scheduled to travel to South Africa for the BRICS, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa summit in August. It will be recalled that the ICC had on 17th of March issued an arrest warrant against Mr. Putin over alleged war crimes in Ukraine. As a signatory to the Rome Statute, South Africa is legally bound to detain Mr. Putin and bring him to trial. However, Ms. Pandor disclosed in an interview that the South African authorities will first consult with the Russian side regarding the warrant. South Africa enjoys tight relations with Moscow in spite of Western condemnations.
Well, obviously, this is a very serious decision by the ICC. We're a member state. that has signed on to the International Criminal Court. Many countries which should sign on are not members of it, and we had hoped other forms of warrants would be issued by the ICC, because there are many, many countries and leaders who have practiced very serious abuses in situations of conflict, but they remain unscathed.
You're watching Spring Global on Western Spring Television. We'll be right back after this break. Please stay with us.
Born 16th September 1923, named Harry Lee Kuan and known as Lee Kuan Yew, he was often addressed by his initials of LKY. Lee Kuan Yew was a barrister and the first Prime Minister of Singapore between 1959 and 1990. Educated at Raffles Institution from 1936 to 1940 and the Fitzwilliam House between 1947 and 1949, Lee Kuan Yew established a highly effective and anti-corrupt governance system that midwifed the transformation of Singapore into a high net worth income economy within a generation. He never hid his exception to Western mode democratic ideal, which he believed had not assisted developing nations to attain good government. Before his death on 23rd March 2015, the People's Action Party, which he founded, had used its political influence to establish the United World College of Southeast Asia to expand his economic ideas among countries that constitute the Asian Tiger. Western Spring Television identifies Lee Kuan Yew as a major character in history. Named Mao Zedong at birth, but globally known as Mao Zedong, he was a Chinese revolutionary and founder, People's Republic of China, which he led as chairman of the Chinese Communist Party from 1949 until his death in 1976. He was a communist who believed in the attainment of power by the instrumentality of gun. His wise saying, "Political power grows out of the barrel of gun," formed the major plank of his revolutionary struggle for the control of China. In the long span of his leadership and political power, Mao Zedong relentlessly entrenched the communist philosophy in China, which emphasized the revolutionary struggle of the vast majority of people against the exploiting class and their state structures. The communist leaders defined the class struggle as people's war. Mao Zedong was a story of grass to grace, having risen from peasantry to preeminent status as China's most respected leader. Western Spring Television identifies Mao Zedong as a major character in history.
Thank you for staying with us and you're welcome back. Moving over to Asia. China's military said it had monitored and driven away a U.S. destroyer that illegally entered waters around the Paracel Island in the South China Sea. In a statement, the military said that the guided missile destroyer USS Millennium intruded into China's territorial waters, undermining peace and stability in the busy waterway. Tian Julin, a spokesperson for China's Southern Theater Command, said the theater forces will maintain a high state of alert and take all necessary measures to safeguard national sovereignty and security and peace and stability in the South China Sea. However, the U.S. Navy disputed the Chinese military statement, stating that the destroyer was conducting routine operations in the South China Sea and was not expelled. In a statement, the U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet said the United States will continue to fly, sail, and operate wherever international laws allows. Meanwhile, United States President Joe Biden has expressed solidarity with China's embattled Uyghur minority in a message to Muslims around the world as they celebrate the holy month of Ramadan. He stated that together with its allies, the United States stands in solidarity with Muslims who continue to face oppression, including Uyghurs in China and other Muslim communities facing persecution around the world. President Biden, in a statement this morning, also reaffirmed the United States' support to Muslim communities suffering hardship and devastation. President Biden's highlighting of the Uyghurs, who the U.S. government says are being subjected to genocide by the Chinese Communist authorities, comes at a time of strong tensions between Washington and Beijing. Moving on, Taiwan's Foreign Minister Joseph Wu has accused China of involvement in the plan by Honduras to switch diplomatic allegiance from Taipei to Beijing. Beijing views self-ruled Taiwan as its own territory and has been stepping up efforts to win over the 14 countries that continue to maintain formal diplomatic ties with the island. Today's comment by the foreign minister comes a day after Honduras denied it had demanded $2.5 billion in aid from Taiwan before announcing a plan to open relations with China. Speaking to reporters at Parliament, Mr. Wu said the situation with Honduras was not very good, suggesting that the Central American country had demanded a high price to maintain relations with Taiwan. He noted that the marks of Chinese involvement are very obvious, adding that the island will not engage in dollar diplomacy with China. In a separate development, Indian opposition leader Rahul Gandhi has been sentenced to 2 years in prison in a criminal defamation case. Mr. Gandhi was convicted by the court in Gujarat state for 2019 comments about Prime Minister Narendra Modi's son name during an election rally. He will not go to jail immediately as he was granted bail for 30 days and will file an appeal against the conviction. The Congress Party MP was present in court for sentencing, which comes a year before general elections are due. Mr. Gandhi had an election rally in April 2019 questioned why all thieves have the son name Modi. Still in Asia, Australia's leader has unveiled crucial details of a planned referendum which could see it change its constitution for the first time in almost 50 years. If approved, the vote later this year will establish an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, a formal body for indigenous people to give advice on laws. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese argues it will be a very simple but momentous change. Here is a report detailing the proposed referendum.
Australia's leader has unveiled crucial details of a planned referendum which could see it change its constitution. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, who represent about 3.8% of Australia's population, are currently not mentioned in the constitution. For 122 years, Australia's founding document has failed to recognise indigenous communities and their more than 65,000 years of continuous connection to the land. The referendum, to be held between October and December, will seek to enshrine in the Constitution recognition of indigenous people through the establishment of a consultative committee to Parliament called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. The voice has been fiercely debated with support and opposition across the political spectrum. It was initially recommended by a historic document in 2017 called the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Meanwhile, it was drafted by more than 250 indigenous leaders. The statement is considered the best, though not unanimous, call to action for reforms which affect First Nations Australians. On Thursday, Mr. Albanese announced the proposed wording for a question to be put to Australians in a compulsory vote. Speaking to Australians, he said it was a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, asking if they approved the proposed alteration.
This is a modest request. I say to Australia, don't miss it. Don't miss it.
Standing alongside, Indigenous Affairs Minister Linda Burney spoke of how she had spent the first 10 years of her life not being counted.
This is truly a really great day for this nation. Last night, the Senate passed the referendum machinery bill with bipartisan support. And just a few hours ago, the Prime Minister announced the wording of the constitutional amendment. And the question that will be put to Australians at the referendum. And that question is a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve of this proposed alteration? It's a simple question. It's a matter from the heart. 6 years ago, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people met at Uluru. The statement from the heart was the largest ever First Nations consensus on a way forward for this country.
The proposal, subject to debate in Parliament, states the voice will make representations to members of Parliament and policymakers on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. However, Parliament will have the power to decide on the voice's composition, functions, powers and procedures. Some of the cases arising, according to the Uluru statement, alludes to the fact that Australians feel a powerlessness when tackling structural problems to improve their lives. These problems include having a shorter life expectancy than non-Indigenous Australians, disproportionately poorer health and education outcomes, and higher incarceration rates. Arguments abound that this is often because of a failure to properly consult Indigenous people on solutions. An Uluru statement signatory, Professor Megan Davis, wrote that non-Indigenous people are making decisions about communities they have never visited and people they do not know, and also explained what the voice is and its purpose.
Yeah, so the voice is a mechanism that enables First Nations people to have a voice in the decisions and policies and laws made by the government of the day and by the Parliament. It gets us a seat at the table, and that's something that we don't have now. And so that's what the voice to Parliament is in a nutshell. It's not about, our mob wanting to be politicians. They don't want to join political parties. It's not about being ideological. They live in communities. They work for their communities. They live their whole lives. But they do want to have input into laws and policies because currently that doesn't happen. And that's why we see the situation that we see in Indigenous affairs across the nation.
Meanwhile, changing Australia's constitution has never been easy, and more than 4 in 5 referendums fail. Only 8 of 44 referendums held since 1901 have been carried, and none since 1977. But deep divisions remain across Australian society, as opposition leader Peter Dutton has said his Conservative Liberal Party has yet to decide whether they would support the voice and required more detail, including the government's own legal advice. On the other hand, the Nationals Party, the junior coalition partner in the former Conservative-led government, announced in November they had decided to oppose the voice, saying it would divide the nation along racial lines. However, for it to succeed, a majority of Australians need to vote yes, and there also needs to be majority support in at least 4 of Australia's 6 states.
In the Middle East, Israel has ratified a law limiting the circumstances in which a prime minister can be removed, despite worries that it may shield incumbent Benjamin Netanyahu from any fallout from his corruption trials. The Knesset approved the bill by a 61-47 final vote this morning, under which Prime Minister can only be compelled to step aside if the Knesset or 3/4 of cabinet ministers declare them so on fiscal or psychological grounds. The amended definition for the incapacity of the Prime Minister is among a number of legislative measures proposed by the Religious Nationalist Coalition that have tipped Israel into crisis. According to experts, the rule means Mr. Netanyahu could possibly be declared incapable by Attorney General Gali Baharav Miaira should she perceive an attempt by him to halt the 3 court cases against him. In other news, the United Kingdom's interest rates have been hiked to their highest for 14 years in an attempt to slow the soaring cost of living. The Bank of England's decision to lift rates to 4.25% from 4% comes after inflation rose unexpectedly last month. It also follows the collapse of two U.S. banks and the rescue of Swiss lender Credit Suisse, but the bank said the UK financial system was resilient. The bank voted to raise rates after the unexpected rise in inflation last month, but said it is expected the cost of living to fall sharply over the rest of the year. Talking sports, UEFA is to investigate payments made by its Dunsteel 95 company. Barcelona, who deny any wrongdoings, acknowledged the payments were made to Dunsteel 95 between 2001 and 2018. The payments revealed by radio station SER Catalunya came to light following an investigation by tax authorities into Dunsteel 95. Former Barcelona president Josep Maria Bartomeu and Sandro Rosell, as well as Nigeria, have been indicted alongside the club. Ineos owner Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Qatari banker Sheikh Jassim are set to submit new bids to buy Manchester United after a deadline was extended at their request amid confusion last night. Bidders were told they had until 21:00 GMT to submit second revised bids. However, it is unclear when the new deadline will be. It was also gathered that several others proposed investors made their submission by that time. Mr. Ratcliffe and Sheikh Jassim are the only publicly declared bidders. It is reported that U.S. investment company Elliott has made an offer to purchase a minority stake irrespective of who ends up owning the club. Before we end Spring Global, here is a recap of our top stories. A former Deputy Senate President Ike Ekweremadu, his wife Beatrice, and their doctor have been convicted of organ trafficking in the first verdict of its kind under the Modern Slavery Act. The World Health Organization, WHO, has announced that 8 new confirmed cases of the Marburg disease have been reported in Equatorial Guinea. China's military said it had monitored and driven away a U.S. destroyer that illegally entered waters around the Parasil Island in the South China Sea. You can follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Western Spring Television. You can also watch us live on our YouTube channel at Western Spring Television. Thank you for joining us. I am Tunde Ido. Good evening.